Who knew that one of the biggest headaches for a maple sugar operation is deer?
We find often it's like a mature doe, an older doe that's by herself during the time of year when she's by herself. She gets bored and she'll take one little section of the bush and she'll chew up 150 drops just in one area.
Oh, geez. Now, what are they after the syrup, the sap? Or?
No, I think they just like chewing on the tubing. It just feels good on their gums.
And the squirrels are just chewing on the tubing.
Yeah.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Last weekend was Maine Maple Sunday. For some sugar operations, half of the annual sales happen on one day, which means we're making and selling the rest right now. Today we're dragging your ears to the biggest maple candy maker in the state, and it all starts with the maple trees I'm standing next to right now. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Dysarts, EBS, Doors Equipment, and Napa Auto Parts. Today's show is coming to you from Knox, Maine, home to Kinney Sugar House. On this day, it's snowing, and the temperature's actually just above freezing. This is when the sap starts to really run. The owners are Marianne and Lee Kinney. Marianne serves in the Maine House of Representatives with me, and her husband Lee is standing right here. Well, first of all, welcome to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine.
Well, thank you.
And more importantly, thanks for having me at Kinney Sugar House.
Well, sure. Thanks for coming.
Well, a May Maple Sunday was last weekend, but the season is really in full swing right now. How long are you going to be in a sugaring operation before the trees just stop giving you anything?
Well, you never know. It depends on the weather. Usually we go till around mid-April in this area of the state.
Yeah.
So down southern Maine, they'll be a little earlier, and up in Somerset County, they go a little longer.
And you can't even be exactly sure when they're going to start either.
No. Usually it's going a little bit more by now, but not always.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that we're really just getting started for May Maple Sunday.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a tour, but I'd like to stop at this sign that's on the side of the building right now. It says, under Maine law, there's no liability for injury to a participant in an agritourism activity conducted at this agritourism location, yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
Perfect. Because we have so many good experiences that are on active farms in the state of Maine that people really can enjoy going to look at. But you got to realize it's a working business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot of farms, there's animals, and, there's dangers implied a little bit, you know.
And especially if you're going to be walking around looking at the operation here, as we're about to do a little bit, you're walking not necessarily on paved paths.
Exactly.
So if somebody falls and breaks themselves, take the lawyers out of the equation.
Sure. Well, one of the things we explain to people when we take them for a tour up through our woods, we take them up through our road, but it'll never be sanded. And the reason why is because we don't want any salt in our roads. The salt is very, very bad on sugar maples. And it's actually killing a lot of them alongside the roads and stuff. So the whole point of that is the road is to support my sugar maples, not to kill my sugar maple.
Kill them off.
So if it gets icy, we just go around until it comes out, but we're never going to sand and salt it.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, we're standing outside the sugar house itself. I guess the evaporator's inside.
Yes.
And we will get back to that. But we are surrounded by maple trees with a lot of tubing.
Yes.
Now, when I was growing up, which frankly was a long time ago, my first visit to a sugar house was the old style that a lot of old folks think about now. It was a case where you had the buckets hanging from the trees.
That's how I grew up.
Yep.
We did 1,000 buckets with all galvanized buckets, which we can't use anymore. And we got a bunch of kids from the high school down to Edward Little down in Auburn, and they all came and helped us haul sap behind a bulldozer through the woods, and it was a lot of fun. But
yeah, a lot of them were horse-drawn at the time, too, when I was first aware of this.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I ever looked in a bucket of sap that had come out of a tree, there's a couple of insects sitting in it.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, wow, carbohydrates and protein.
Yeah. Well, they get filtered out, and it's boiled for a long time.
Well, that's all changed, too, with the tubing and stuff, because you don't really have the open buckets collecting everything as well as sap.
Yes. Yep.
Let's go take a look.
Well, one of the nice things about those open buckets is that it collects flavor from the air, and it helps flavor your syrup when you're done, just from the air.
Is that right?
Yes.
What is it doing? Is it oxidizing in some way? Or?
Yeah, in a way, yeah.
Okay.
And that's been one of the things people talk about nowadays is syrup doesn't tend to have as much flavor as it used to be because we're so enclosed. Everything's contained and enclosed and filtered better than it used to be. So we're seeing a lot of trend towards the darker syrups to go back to get more flavor.
Is that did you just boil them down longer, or you treat them
No,
way differently?
Syrup is syrup. It all goes to a specific density, and what makes it dense is the sugar content. So the sugar content's the same. You tend to get darker syrups either from using older sap, or sap that's not as good a quality, or from boiling it slower. Here, our evaporator setup as an oil-fired evaporator is fixed, so it boils at a specific speed. So our boiling rate is fixed, and so for us, the only way we can make a lower quality syrup is have lower grade sap, which you tend to get later in the season when it's warmer out. It's hard to keep that sap quality up before you can process it.
So if you see grade, how do you grade them? A, B, C?
Well, there's new grades that we're going to now. The highest grade they call golden, and there's amber and then dark, and then so they're changing the grades just a little bit. The couple of advantage of this: one, it's going to be the same throughout the industry. So we've been having. Maine has their own grading system, Quebec has theirs, and New Brunswick has theirs, and Vermont has theirs, and it's very, very confusing. And with the world shrinking, such as with the internet and being able to ship stuff off, you get somebody down in Florida, and they call me, and they're looking for a specific grade. Well, we don't have those grades. We call it this.
Yeah.
It's very confusing. With this new system, these are going to be the grades for the entire industry. Canada's all on board. All the states that make syrup are on board, and that's going to be exciting.
So it brings us back to the fact that the quality of sap is better earlier in the season than later. How does that work?
Because it's colder.
Yeah, okay.
It just keeps better.
Well, we're standing at a maple grove right now, which is full of tubing. There's a tree here. I can't even tell. Is this one tapped?
This tree is tapped.
Okay.
And I call this my magic tree. I have several of these. And our logo here at Kinney Sugar House is where sap flows uphill.
Well, that was my next comment.
And if you notice, the sap is flowing up this tubing vertically about 14 feet. And it's using what's called the Bernoulli effect, where it's sucking on this upper line from the sap coming down over the hill with help from my vacuum pumps. And it's actually pulling on that, and it's sucking on the top of these basically are like straws that are sucking on the top of it, and it's pulling it up.
It's almost like you'd siphon gasoline or what?
Yes, yeah. It does require a little bit of a vacuum leak, and that's why you can hear it a little bit. You notice the ball valve slightly cracked, and that's keeping it flowing a little bit better. That's telling me that my boys are doing too good of a job keeping my lines tight up here in the woods on this particular line, and so we've actually had to manufacture our own little leak temporarily until a squirrel comes out and helps me on the other end, then I can tighten this ball valve up.
No kidding. Well, when we say it's pumping uphill, I mean, what we're looking at is a tree that has tubing right down at the base, maybe 2 feet off the ground, and it's pumping it all the way up, 10, no, it's more than that. It's closer to 12, 13 feet.
It's with 12, yeah. It can go 14 feet, 3 inches.
And so it's pumping that up and running down the tube that's up there towards the sugar house.
Yep. And if you need to go more than that, what you do is you'll run a series of these. We actually have a place in our bush where it goes up 3 different times, and it goes up about 8 feet at a time. We couldn't lift it all in one shot, but we can do it in 3 little shots.
If you've just joined us, this is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I'm at Kinney's Sugar House in Knox, the biggest producer of maple sugar candies in Maine. And Lee Kinney is showing me around. We're out by the trees, it's snowing, and the sap is running. I'm wondering if the age of a tree makes any difference. And I expect to get an answer when we return in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Today's show is on the grounds of Kinney Sugar House in Knox. There are bigger sugar operations in Maine, making gallons and gallons of syrup. But if you see sugar candies in a store, good chance it came from this tree right out here. Lee Kinney is showing me around, and I'm wondering, Lee, is there any way to suck the sap out of the tree faster? Or if this is as fast as it's going to run and you just can't change it?
Well, you can't really force it out. What we're doing is we do run under vacuum. We run on what's called a low vacuum. We're only running about 15, 16 inches of vacuum with a better pump system and maybe a tighter line so we could get it up to 30, but our pumps won't pump that high. that we have. We have old milk and pilot pumps that aren't designed for that kind of vacuum. And what it's doing is it's not really pulling it out of the tree. It's just lowering the pressure outside the tree. Mm-hmm. You hear them talk about the warm days, cold nights all the time to get the sap flowing. And what that's doing is that's creating positive pressure inside the tree. So when it does warm up, it's pushing that sap out. Whereas if it rains overnight, it never cooled that night, so and so that pressure is going to slowly go away inside the tree. With a vacuum pump, I'm still pulling on it. Mm-hmm. Now, I may get a quarter of a run, but it's going to be over a long period of time because it's not freezing during that period of time. So it might come quarter as fast, but it might come for 3 times as long, so I'm getting 3/4 of the run in reality. Mm. And it's certainly better than no run at all. And we'll notice with a lot of, there's other sugar bushes in the area, and on these rainy days, we're getting 400 gallons an hour come in, which for us is pretty small run, but our neighbors are not getting anything, the ones without vacuum.
Oh, yeah.
Over the course of the season, the vacuum pumps will double our production per tap.
Yeah. So when you're rooting for the ideal weather forecast, what is it you're rooting for?
I like it to get, mid to low 20s. I don't want to get too cold. If it gets super cold, then it could pull apart some of my bigger lines. They tend to shrink a lot more, and they could pull apart and cause some problems. Also, if it gets super cold overnight, it takes forever to warm up. So you get a run, but it's not till 3 o'clock in the afternoon for a couple hours before it freezes again. Yeah. And it doesn't matter how fast it runs. If it's only going to run for a couple hours, it's not going to amount to a real lot. So I like 22, 23. Mm-hmm. So it's a good solid freeze. The trees, really do freeze up, but not so bad that it can't warm back up the next day. And then you like it to get well into the 40s, like around 50, 45 to 55 degrees. It gets over 60 too many days in a row. The trees start budding and leaving out, and
they're not giving you anything.
And then they start shutting you off. And once a tree shuts you off, they start making their leaves and they're shutting you off. You're done.
Yeah.
They do not turn back on, regardless of what the weather does after that.
There's nothing you can say to them to encourage them after that.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Historically, how is it, do you know, that we came to tap maple trees instead of oak? I mean, how was this ever discovered?
Well, it was more by accident, and they give the credit to the American Indians that they found it broken branches. They'd see stuff dripping and down the tree, and they're thirsty and figure, well, it's coming out of the tree. It can't be too bad. So they taste it and notice it was kind of sweet. And and it's subtle, but you can tell it in the sap. There's a little sugar in there, and so they decided, well, if we concentrated a little bit, maybe it would be sweeter and taste even better. And so they hollowed out some logs, and they'd pour the sap in those, and they'd take their hatchet and chop the side of a tree and put a little trough underneath it to catch it. And to boil it, they basically took a hollowed out log and they dropped bricks in it that were red hot bricks or rocks and stuff, and let it steamed off, and they pulled them out and warmed them back up again in the fire. So it'd take forever. They'd make a jet black product. But of course, they didn't have plastic back then or anything to really make syrup, so they put most of it all the way to sugar, which means they took all the water out of it, and doing it a very slow method. And it was in bricks, and then you could just take your knife and shave off a little sugar. We still make sugar here. We make a lot of sugar. We make about 5 tons of sugar every year.
5 tons?
Yes,
of
we
sugar?
make a lot of maple sugar here, and we're more than anybody else in Maine by far. And but we do it all in powdered mode, and it's a lot easier to sprinkle on your on your toast or bake with it.
So you really are, in that sense, a specialty operation. Others will make more syrup, you'll make more sugar.
We value add most of our products, so we make a lot of candy and a lot of sugar and quite a bit of maple cream. I was making maple cream all morning, last 3 days in a row, trying to, and we make a lot. So I'm making it. It takes me all morning just to do off one batch because we do so many pots at a time.
Well, I'm glad you're able to spare a few minutes with me. Yeah. I can obviously see a lot of maple trees here, but you're tapping a lot more than this. So where's it all coming from?
It's all continuous. And everything comes to the sugar house, and you notice there's one set of lines that come into this side of the building, and there's 2 on the other side. So this side of the bush is maybe a third of the bush, and but it all goes out as far as 1.75 miles is the last tree out the other direction that we're pulling it all continuous in here. There's about, I guess we tapped 8,850 taps this year, and we're estimating approximately 75 miles of tubing, and it's all interconnected. Every piece is connected to everything else. And
if you get a really serious summer storm with a lot of down branches, do you have a lot of repairs to make?
Oh yes, and we walk it in the fall. We found that that's time well spent. We'll actually have a guy just run right through it, and just pick the branches up off the tubing. It's real easy picking a branch off the tubing in the fall, but once you get 4 feet of snow on it, it's not so much fun. And it disappears, and then you're cutting the tubing and pulling it out from underneath it, and then reconnecting it, and that's not always cool. And so we find that saves us a lot. We don't bother fixing chewed up drops and stuff. The deer and the squirrel are just terrible. They chew up about 600 drops a year I have to make just for replacement because of the deer and the squirrel. We will have a handful get chewed up by other animals. Porcupines would probably be number 3, but they really just chew on the one tree they happen to live on or something. They don't just sit and they go right down the line like a deer will. And we find often it's like a mature doe, an older doe that's by herself during the time of year when she's by herself. She gets bored and she'll take one little section of the bush and she'll chew up 150 drops just in one area.
Oh, now, what are they after the syrup, the sap? Or?
No, I think they just like chewing on the tubing. It just feels good on their gums.
And the squirrels are just chewing on the tubing.
Yeah. And most people say there's no possible way they can smell through it. I've talked to a guy that thought that handling the tubing with your bare hands put salt on it, and maybe they're just trying to go after that. I think the deer just like chewing on the tubing because it feels good on their gums and stuff, and squirrels chew on everything to see what might be on the other side. I don't know, but they're terrible.
If you've just joined us, this is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I'm at Kinney's Sugar House in Knox, the biggest producer of maple sugar candies in Maine, and Lee Kinney is showing me around. We're out by the trees, it's snowing, and the sap is running. I'm wondering if the age of a tree makes any difference. And I expect to get an answer when we return in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8 on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Today's show is on location. We're at Kinney Sugar House in Knox. Maine Maple Sunday was last weekend, but visitors can straggle in to most sugar houses in Maine, and fresh Maine maple products are popping up on store shelves everywhere. Lee Kinney is showing me around. We're surrounded by tapped maples and miles of tubing, and I'm wondering if the age of the tree makes a difference.
Well, they'll produce sap at any age, but the younger trees don't produce as much sap, and they don't tend to get as sweet. I know people that have tapped them all the way down to ridiculously small levels just to see if it would harm them anyway, like 3-4 inch trees, and put them under 30 inches of vacuum. They said no, it didn't bother them a bit. There's just like a young kid. A 10-year-old kid can take a lot more than we can. So it certainly doesn't hurt the tree any. But they also noticed they didn't get a lot of sap, and it wasn't very sweet either. I'm certified organic, so they tell me not to tap a tree under 10 inches of diameter breast height. I'm not sure why. It makes them feel better, I guess. I don't know. Because there's no real science that says anything less than that's going to be harmful in any way, shape, or form. But I don't like, and the other problem is they don't want me tapping a tree that's not super healthy. And there's different rules of thumb. Can you leave it alone in hopes that it gets better? 9 times out of 10, if you've got a tree that's not super healthy, it's in the process of dying, it's going to die anyway. So I've talked to other people that says, well, tap the hell out of it until it dies, get what sap you can out of it while it's on its way out. But you don't want to tap into a dead part of a tree. So if you're tapping into a dead tree or a dead part of a tree, it can actually flavor the sap, and it'll flavor hundreds of gallons. One tree could flavor hundreds of gallons of sap. And so you want to make sure that, if you are doing something like that, then you got to be very, very careful.
Is there a limit to how many taps you can put in per tree?
Well, no. Again, I'm certified organic, so I have to follow their rules, and they don't want me to put a second tap in unless the tree is about 20 inches in diameter, and maybe a third tap if it's really big, like 3-4 feet in diameter. They mostly follow the industry recommendations. The industry doesn't recommend more than 3 taps for any tree ever anymore, so we've backed off on that. and I would never put more than 3 taps. But I have 12, 15 trees that I might have 3 taps in, and they're all about 4 feet in diameter. They're just monsters. And so, unless they're a really big tree, then you don't want to keep putting. But the other thing is, you got to think of they're old.
Yeah.
You're talking a 4-foot diameter tree. You're talking a 200-year-old tree.
Yeah.
How many holes do you really want to drill in a 200-year-old tree? It's old. Be nice to it.
Well, at some point, do you walk through the grove and say that one's firewood next year? Or
my density isn't what I would like it to be. Mm-hmm. We've been taking great pains since we've started this to try to find the young maples coming in and cleaning out around them and encouraging them to grow. We've actually planted over 5,000 trees over the last couple of years across the top in the old pasture land that we never use and haven't used for years. So we're basically, as long as they're still alive, I'll tap them, and then we'll cut them down once they're dead. Mm-hmm. But there will come a day when the density gets up. You look for around 80 taps per acre. Mm-hmm. And my average is about half that, around 40 throughout the bush. You're looking at a pretty decent part of the bush right here. Some areas are better, some areas are pretty thin. And so once you get over like 100 taps per acre, then you start going and start thinking about which ones should you get rid of. So your priority would be like the red or silver maples. You want to go first. And then you get 2 side by side. You can check with a refractometer the sugar content and see which one's producing sweeter sap. And if it's one tree's producing sweeter sap than the other today, it'll always produce sweeter sap. So it'll go up and down, but the other one will go up and down with it. So and that'll tell you which one's the better tree to keep. Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Well, I look up the hill there. I can see a pileated woodpecker has worked over one of the dead trees up there.
Yes.
Which usually means it had carpenter ants, or the bird was really horny and wanted to impress its mate.
Yes.
But what pests do you have to deal with?
Well, you gotta keep the ants out of the sugar house. That's a big thing. The squirrel and the deer are the worst by far. Mm-hmm. The woodpeckers don't bother me. If they're pecking on a tree, it's probably already on its way out. They're keeping the animals out. The bugs out of the tree, and they may be doing me more help than harm. So we leave them alone, and we do have quite a few different breeds of woodpeckers. I'm not an expert by any stretch, but there's 3 basic different kinds that we see all the time. We have those huge ones I call woody woodpeckers.
That's the pileated woodpeckers.
They look just like them. Those things are monsters, and you can
loud
hear them
too, aren't they?
Oh, they're loud. They're loud. Then we have a medium-sized one that's about the size of a robin or so, and then there's this little tiny thing that's
the downy, the hairy and the downy.
Yeah, they're cute little buggers, and we see all 3 of them all the time.
Well, as we walk over to the sugar house itself, tell me a little bit about your operation. Who do you sell to? How can people come buy sugar from you?
Well, we're primarily a wholesaler because we make so much of everything that we try to supply stores, mostly larger stores. They're going to make big orders. So we don't do a lot of the gas stations and stuff that are going to move small amounts over long periods of time. We like to hit some of the bigger stores like Parody's down there at the Jetport in Portland is a huge buyer of our syrup. So we like those customers where they get big orders. We do have about 50 stores or so. Mm-hmm. My wife just got back from the New England Products Trade Show, so I guess we have a few more now. Looks like we're going to be in Logan Airport now, so that'll be our 3rd airport. We're also in the Bangor Airport at Grasshopper shop, and we're in a couple of those.
Have you got more product or more demand? I mean, where's the balance here? At what point are you going to have too many customers and not enough sugar?
When my wife and I started out, we were making all the plans for this, and we were building the sugar house, and we had a rough idea how many taps we were going to get that first year because it was a phased-in operation because we built everything ourselves, and we paid for it as we went, which is the nice thing is everything you see is paid for, and it came out of our own pockets, not government money, and there's no loans, there's no we don't owe the bank a penny, and as far as the sugar business goes and stuff, which is kind of nice. But I sat her down one day. I said, look, we're going to be doing well over 1,500 taps our first year. She says, yeah, so? I said, do you know how much syrup that is? And she says, oh, yeah. I said, we need to start building a market. And so we actually went out and we bought several barrels of syrup, and we taught ourselves how to make candy because we knew we wanted to do a lot of value adding, and bottled some up and started developing a name brand for us. We actually started calling ourselves Kinney's Maple Confections because we knew we were going to do Maine Maple Confections. But it was too long. So after first year, we shortened it down, but we knew we wanted the word Maine in it. We wanted confections in it, but then it just got too long, and everybody started calling us the Kinney's, just Kinney's or Kinney's Sugar House. So it's like, well, if that's what everybody's calling us, maybe that's what our name should be. So after 1 year, we changed this house to Kinney's Sugar House. But we started building a market before we even tapped our first tree. We sold the stuff, and pretty much every year since, we still have to buy a few barrels. My wife's always been able to stay a year ahead of us in production. The boys and I are constantly looking around trying to find more trees and encourage more trees to grow in and planting more trees. And we actually did a lot of work on about 50 other acres of land that we own, trying to get the maple trees in those groves cleaned out so they can grow a little bit faster to get online here a little bit quicker. She always seems to stay a little bit ahead of us on the whole marketing thing. It doesn't seem to matter how much syrup I make; she can sell more. It does. It's a great business, when you know you can always get rid of it.
Yeah.
And there's a built-in bulk market that you can always sell a bulk, and bulk price is very high. It has been for 4 or 5 years now, and because everybody can sell their syrup.
That's Lee Kinney. I'm Bob Duchesne, and this is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. We're at Kinney's Sugar House in Knox, the largest maple candy maker in the state. In the U.S., New York and Vermont tap more maples than Maine, but we are catching up fast. However, the big gorilla in the room is Canada. What happens above the border has a big impact on what happens to maples in the Pine Tree State. In a moment, 3 million barrels of Canadian maple syrup disappears. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket with Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Warm days, cold nights, and the sap starts flowing. Maple trees are oozing their sap into sugar houses all over Maine right now. We are at one of them. Lee Kinney is showing me around Kinney's Sugar House in Knox. We're about to go inside to turn sap into sugar, but first, Canada. The Canadians dominate the market, and what they do affects what we do. Right, Lee?
It wasn't that long ago the Canadian Federation was sitting on about 3 or 4 million barrels of syrup, and then and the demand was just going through the roof, and people were selling stuff left and right. And then we had a bad year, where a lot of the big producers did make a lot of syrup. I actually had a decent year that year, but I was the anomaly, being close to the coast and stuff. The big guys didn't make a lot of syrup, and in over 2 years they wiped out all the warehouses up in Canada. And the Confederation just cleaned them right out, and then all of a sudden the price of bulk went from around $1, a little more than $1 a pound, to now it's well over $3 a pound, and that's a huge difference. And so a lot of these big guys, they don't even think about bottling syrup or making candy. They just fill the barrels and ship it off. They can sell it for $3.25, 50 cents a pound. It depends on the grade. They're happy to just you do it.
Well, that amount of syrup they store up in Canada amounts to what looks like a cartel. Are they able to control prices by how they release the syrup from those big vats?
The Canadian Federation really does control the market price of bulk syrup.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they control also how much the Canadians can make. They're all on quotas, and they can only make so much syrup, which is why 80% of the big producers up there in Somerset County are Canadians.
Yeah.
They live in Canada, and they speak French, and they rent some land from from the big forest owners up there, and they come down and tap a bunch of trees and go home. And is because they can tap as many as they want in Maine.
Well, as I'm looking at the sugar house here, do you actually have a retail operation here for people who come visit?
Well, we do. But we don't have set hours.
Yeah.
Obviously this time of year we're around a lot. There are other times of year where we're here a lot. Late summer, early fall, when we're doing fairs, and a lot of our farm stands and stuff are selling stuff hand over fist. We're down here almost every day making candy and bottling syrup, and we're doing something. There's always people around. It never hurts to call us first, though, because we don't have enough year-round business to plant somebody here. 9 to 5 every day, or to have regular hours at this point.
Well, when
we're working towards that.
Yeah. When you are in this business, do you have a slow season where you can get away to Fort Lauderdale or go have some fun, or is it year-round busy?
Well, I grew up a dairy farmer, and I used to love the winter because that was a slow season. So I grew up ice skating and snowmobiling and skiing because that was the only time of year where I could ever do any of that kind of fun stuff. And but when we started the sugar business with the tubing, that's all that's all run and maintained and tapped and all that stuff during the hard winter.
Mm-hmm.
So when the sap starts running, we don't run out with our buckets and our drill and start drilling the trees. They're all done. We finish by Valentine's Day. We're done tapping, and we've been out there all winter. We start usually in early November, and so it's not really a slow season. For us at all. You just go from different types of seasons.
And it's going to get even worse now that we're keeping Marianne busy in the state legislature.
Yes, yeah, she's doing a good job down there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she and I share a similar interest, although she's active in it. I think agriculture is an economic development boon for the state going forward, and it's something we really ought to pay a lot of attention to.
It's changed a lot. There used to be a lot of medium-sized farms across the state. It was hard to get very big because of all the rocks in our fields. You can only make them so big, and other problems like that. But now we're noticing that there's no such thing as a medium-sized farm in Maine anymore. They're either really small, family operation, kind of like ours or so, where there's just 1 or 2 or 3 employees, or they're really, really big now. But it's hard to make a medium-sized operation work. But you're getting a lot of these new operations come in, and it's nice seeing farming actually growing, I think, lately.
And it's keeping Maine much like the way Maine has always been, too. So you get the double benefit of it's the state I think a lot of us grew up in, and we're taking advantage of a natural resource that's renewable.
Absolutely. And it's the best way to keep our land open and available to the public is to make it economically viable for it to be forest, for instance. My land, my woods is going to stay woods because it pays for itself. And if it was just sitting there and it was dead weight charging me taxes, it's awful easy to cut out a lot and put it into a house lot someday. But as long as it can be profitable for me to make maple syrup with it, then it makes sense for me to leave it as woods, and then my neighbors can hunt it. And the last few weeks has been crazy because I've had 3 different crews hunting coyotes in our woods, and and they're having a blast. And I always tell them, if you shoot a coyote, then you need to come shoot 20 of my squirrels to come back, because now I have less help with the squirrel population.
Right.
So they're always glad to come back in the summertime and shoot some squirrels for me too. Yeah. But it stays open because it's economically viable, and I think myself personally, I think that's how you want to keep open lands in Maine, is just make it viable for farmers or for foresters or somebody to make it profitable to keep it open.
I would agree with you. Okay, well, let's take a look inside.
Sure. All right, guys, came back. It'll be a little squealy in here.
Squealy's okay. All right, so
it's quieter than normally is in here.
So what is this? I mean, tubes and...
Well, we talked about all the tubing in the woods. Everything comes in here. Every single one of our taps all come directly into the sugar house. This is line 3 right here, and this is line 1 and 2 all come into this one. These are just milking parlor releasers you'd see in a milking parlor. And once they're full, they pump it upstairs. The little one's 5 gallons, the big one's 10 gallons. And it's really close to that. It's surprising. So you can actually time the pumps, and it'll tell you how fast it's coming in. You just add them up together. And that gives us an idea whether or not we need to be opening up another sap tank or something upstairs to make sure we have plenty of room.
Now
it's important when you want to go home, go to bed.
Now I'm watching a clear tube here where it's clearly put there so you can see what's running in. And is that a fair amount of sap I see just washing down the pipe?
No, that's pretty slow run right there. It's probably 100 gallons an hour. On a real good run, we can get upwards of 1,200 gallons an hour. It's not uncommon to see.
So this is only 1/12 of what I might see in a really good day.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. That's just a trickle, but it's nice to see.
Yeah.
And the sugar content's actually still running pretty low. It's running around just over 1.5% sugar, which is pretty low. They talk about the 40-to-1 ratio. That's about 2.2% sugar. So at 1.5, I'd have to do the math, but I think I'd have to move around 55, 60 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of syrup.
Yeah.
So it's not as efficient.
Yeah.
But that's where this machine here comes in that you're hearing squealing in the background. That's a reverse osmosis machine. I've actually just lost my membranes. We replaced 2 of them, so we're running it in limp mode with just 2 membranes right at the moment. But normally it's a triple pass system where it runs through the first 2 membranes, then it goes through the 3rd membrane, and then the 4th membrane. So it's like a 3-pass system. And I'll take that 2% sugar and I'll put it all the way up to 16% in one shot. And at 16%, I've taken 87% of the water out that I need to make maple syrup. And this machine at full capacity will do about 2,000 gallons an hour.
Yeah.
So it's very fast.
So what you're essentially doing is taking a lot of the water out before it finally goes to the evaporator?
Absolutely.
And that's got to be very energy efficient compared to the way I grew up, where you just burn wood all the time until you boil it down from scratch?
It's incredibly energy efficient. It does run at 87 amps, so it's a little high on the electricity, but it saves me a fortune in oil.
Oh, I would think so.
Just a small fortune in oil. And so the organic people love them because they're much more efficient than boiling it right from sap. And I need about 5 of these evaporators out here instead of 1 if I didn't have the RO. And they're a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
So the RO is an expensive machine, but for what it does, it's a cheap date, really.
And when you consider what the parts must be made out of, which is all food quality stainless steel,
oh yes,
it can't be cheap.
No, it can't. They're an expensive machine.
Yeah.
2 of these cost what I paid for my house.
No kidding,
So,
really?
Oh yes.
Oh jeez.
Yeah.
In the background, the hum and hiss of a reverse osmosis machine that is preparing maple sap for the final stage in the evaporator. We'll step out there next. We're at Kinney Sugar House in Knox, and Lee Kinney is showing exactly how maple products are made today. Not the old-fashioned way that I remember as a kid, with buckets and pails and cords of wood boiling down sap in a large tub. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and the radio station is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Welcome back to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Maine Maple Sunday was last weekend, but that was just the start of sugaring season in Maine. The largest maple candy producer in Maine is Kinney Sugar House in Knox. I'm there with Lee Kinney, and we're about to visit the evaporator and kitchen to see exactly how it's done. Just before the break, we were in the room where sap runs down the tubes and into the building and into a reverse osmosis machine that removes much of the water. We're back out of that room, and this is the evaporator?
I can close the door and make it a little quieter.
All right.
Yeah, this is the evaporator. So once we run it through the RO, now the clock's ticking because now we've concentrated the sugar and we've also concentrated the bacteria that might be in that sap. And the sugar is the food that the bacteria uses. So we need to get that process pretty quick. So once we're done here, we're going to be turning on the evaporator and start boiling that concentrated sap. When it comes in, you can see it through this nice pretty glass tube. I have it there mostly for decoration so people can see stuff going on. And it's just nice to watch. That actually came out of a milking pile. If you've been in a lot of milking piles, you'll recognize a lot of stuff because I robbed quite a few.
I was going to say it looked familiar to me.
Yeah, including my father's.
Yeah.
We used to milk a lot of cows, and there's not much left in our milking pile. We've been able to take all that stainless steel and put it somewhere else. That's actually a milking pile of wash tank on the other side that you hear running on the other side. This upper unit here, it's called the steam wing, and it's using the steam from the flue pan, the back pan, to preheat the sap. It's getting up to about 202 degrees. You don't want it to get much more than that because otherwise it starts pressurizing, and we don't want to pressurize it. At 202 degrees, it is steaming, and it is boiling off, and it'll actually take off about half the water that's left, that's still in there, and it's using free heat from the steam from the lower unit. It's also producing distilled water that's pouring into the sink at the other side. It's extremely hot distilled water. Boy, it cleans though. It cleans great. And so you put on insulated rubber gloves. We clean the evaporator with it. We can clean dishes with it. We can clean, but most of it ends up right down the drain.
This evaporator is the size of a very large pickup truck bed or bigger.
Well, a lot of people, once we turn it on, say it sounds like a locomotive.
Yeah.
And we actually named it Percy. I don't know if you know the Thomas the Tank Engines.
I do.
When we started out, I had very little kids, so we saw a lot of the Thomas the Tank Engines, so we named him Percy. We always threatened we were going to put a number 6 on the side of it. But it kind of sounds and looks a lot like a locomotive when it runs. This machine's not that terribly big. It's only a 4x14. We're actually making a gallon of syrup a minute with this machine.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And, so it can go very fast. The real big guys will have an evaporator twice as big, concentrate to the same level, and they'll make 2 gallons a minute. And
you mentioned May Maple Sunday, which was last weekend. You do mostly sugar here. There are other maple houses in the area who probably do mostly syrup. Do you see anybody going from house to sample it all?
Oh, yeah. So most people run about 3 different sugar houses over the weekend. With us, we're the only larger one around.
Yeah.
So most people are going to go to a couple real small ones, and then they'll come here. And it's quite a contrast to see the little 2x6 or a little half pint out there in the woods, and and some buckets or a small amount of tubing. And then they come here. It's going to be quite a contrast. We'll have maple cotton candy, and we'll have maple ice cream going with Stone Fox Creamery is going to be here. And we have another couple coming in. They're going to be making popcorn, kettle corn with maple sugar that we made from here and stuff. But we consider ourselves primarily candy makers.
Yeah.
The sugar house is mostly a kitchen, and we're processing candy here every day of the year.
Well, let's go take a look. Yeah, you're killing me, because another one of those childhood memories is when you take that maple syrup out in the fresh snow.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you can see they're boiling a pot over there to make another batch of candy. Right now, he's watching the temperature. It comes off even a few tenths of a degree higher or lower will affect how the candy comes out on the other end, how dense it is. So it's very, very sensitive. Once we've made it, we put it in the candy machine. And really what that does is it holds it, and then we can put it into the auger and stir it. And by stirring it, that turns it to the candy. And pour it into the molds. And we can do just a little bit at a time. So we can use that. We can do a huge batch at a time, sometimes multiple pots, and have almost no waste. So if you do it by hand and stuff, there's going to be a tremendous amount of waste, because it just turns to candy all at once and needs to be put in the mold immediately. And you can't just do a whole pot all at once. So that's where the machine comes in. You can see the molds all lined up. She knows what she needs for candy for orders coming in, so she's lined her molds all up. So she can slide a sheet off, fill it full of candy, and then slide it back on the rack to cool. And we'll let it sit there for a couple hours, and they just pop right out. They're just rubber molds, and we don't have to treat them or anything. We just clean them with hot water. After she pops them out, we put them on the donut drying rack, basically, stainless steel rack, and they can dry and set out. From there, the next day, what we do is we have in here, we have a thickened maple syrup.
Yep.
We get it up to 63 bricks, so it gets a little thicker.
So what does 63 bricks mean?
Well,
what's a brick?
That's the amount of sugar that's in it, basically.
Okay.
And so we're going to soak that candy that we make today. We're going to soak it in here for 6 hours tomorrow. So we're going to warm this up. You can see there's a little bit of sludge in the bottom. It's basically turned to cream on the bottom. We'll warm it up and get rid of all that. And so tomorrow we're going to put it in a rack, and we're going to soak that candy that we made today into this thickened stuff, which is after it's cooled.
Yeah.
And that's why we make it today, because we don't want to be hot. It'll just melt the candies.
Well, that was my next question. How do you just not dissolve what you just made?
So that's why we warm it up today. We'll warm it up tonight, so the boys or I'll do it before we go home. And we'll soak it for around 6 hours, give or take. So if it starts getting a little thicker, we might take it off early, because you do multiple dips in one batch.
Yeah.
And what that does, it produces a crystal coating on the outside. So it's still 100% maple syrup. But with that crystal coating, a little bit of a crunch on the outside, it keeps the candy from drying out or getting moldy or something like that. So instead of regular maple candy, it's only going to have a shelf life for a week or two. But if we dip it, it can be properly stored in a box. It needs a little bit it needs to breathe, but it can't breathe too much or it dries out. So it's going to be just right, and you can't put it in the sun. But if it's properly stored, it could last up to 6 months with that crystal coating on the outside, and it's still 100% maple syrup. No preservatives, nothing added.
Well, it's probably got your name on the outside of the box, so when you take it off to dealers who sell this retail, do they have instructions on how to treat this right so they don't ruin it?
They do. They need to. You don't put it near a window where it's going to have the sun beat on, or next to a heater. But just a cool spot on the shelf is great, and they do pretty well.
Now, you have the candies that you're showing me here, but do you do bulk sugar as well that you ship off to other manufacturers, or?
Well, we do. The sugar we can do in 5-gallon pails. We also do boxes, plastic lined boxes. So somebody calls up and says they want 60 pounds of sugar, we can ship it out, and use it for all kinds of different things. So it's kind of cool. We talked about ice cream before and kettle corn, but we have them making sausage and marshmallows, and there's all kinds of crazy stuff.
Maple cured bacon or whatever.
We're getting a lot of families now. They're walking away from all the other sweeteners. They're going to just honey and maple syrup, the healthy ones. And so they buying so much sugar that they'll actually buy 25 pounds of sugar or something, just sit on it, because it keeps great. It's just my family keeps a tub right in the middle of the kitchen table all the time. So
once you've gone to maple sugar, and all of a sudden the white sugar just seems so dull.
It does. We don't even own it. My son was trying to make some punch the other day, and we ran out of maple sugar, and I told him to just use plain sugar. And he just looked at me with this blank look on his face. He didn't know what the heck I was talking about. What are you talking about, Dad? Just regular cane sugar. He didn't even know. I was actually quite proud of him. My 11-year-old son had no idea what sugar was.
That's excellent.
Yeah. We did dig out an old tub that we had out back, for a long time, but it was still fine.
All right, so for somebody who's been listening to the show for the last hour, where do they go buy your sugar?
Oh, good grief.
Let's say the greater Bangor area you mentioned out at the airport, I think.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sending anybody there.
But we're in a lot of small shops up there.
And it's going to say Kinney's on the box.
Yes. Yes, it will. Kinney Sugar House. If they don't have it, ask for it.
Maine maple sugar. It tastes better, it's better for you, and people all over America are starting to figure that out. From fancy restaurants to simple households. And that means it's pretty darn good for the Maine economy. We're behind Vermont and New York, but we've got a lot of maples just sitting there waiting to go to work for us, and I believe we can catch up. My thanks to Lee and Marianne Kinney of Kinney Sugar House in Knox. Would you believe I enjoyed the tour so much, I forgot to ask for free samples? Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Dysarts, EBS, Doors Equipment, and Napa Auto Parts. We'll be back next Saturday at 9 a.m. and Sunday morning at 8 a.m. Remember, this show and all previous shows are archived online at 929theticket.com. If you want to hear old shows or share this one with somebody, 929theticket.com. This is Sports Radio 929 The Ticket.